Hey there everyone! My Jinhsi video seems to have been a little successful, so I bet you're interested in her. I briefly mentioned her team building in the overview video, but I didn't mention a bunch of stuff. So here's a dedicated video. So first of all, I want to talk about perhaps the most universal character to throw in any team. A character I would go as far as to call the official of Wuthering Waves. Not best in slot in a lot of places, but if you have no clue what unit to throw in your team after DPS and support, Jinhsiwuwa has your back. So first of all, I would like to talk about her biggest quality, which is her very fast concerto rotation. She swaps in, does her skill, heavy attack, ult, and then heavy attack. That's enough. Like, you have full concerto energy after that, and that's all of her damage. Along with this, she is able to run the Moonlit Cloud set, being able to buff your main DPS by being able to buff their attack stat. And since Jinhsi is an attack scaler, this is good for her. Jinhsiwuwa is also a literally 100% free character, so you are guaranteed to have her. So now, what makes Jinhsiwuwa so good that I mentioned her at the very beginning of the video? Well, she has no coordinated attacks, and her outro isn't even that good for Jinhsi, since most of her damage comes from her skill. Well, Jinhsi desperately lacks supports, so the best thing you can do is either help her with stacking her E, or be very fast with your rotation. And like I said before, Jinhsiwuwa is the second in this category. Not only that, but she's also on Jinhsi's banner, which means you are very likely to get at least a couple of sequences for your Jinhsiwuwa, which makes it so her damage output is going to be higher than most of your other sub-DPSs, since most of her sequences seems to be based around buffing her own damage. But then Sequence 6 also buffs the entire team's attack, which, you know, includes Jinhsi. And like I said before, Jinhsi is still an attack scaler, so attack buffs are very good. She's also a very resource-efficient character, because like I mentioned before, she's kind of like the official of this game. You can literally slot her anywhere you want, and she'll do fine. And because she's a sub-DPS that would rather focus on buffing, the Moonlit Cloud set is a very efficient set to farm, and you don't have to worry about getting a lot of good rolls, because, well, her damage just isn't going to be as important as someone like Jinhsi's. But if Jinhsiwuwa isn't the complete best in slot, who is? Well, the answer to that question is Jinhsi. Her coordinated attacks and high damage output make her a perfect Jinhsi partner, but she still has her issues. Jinhsi is an incredibly strong character, and if you have her, that's the quick and easy conclusion, just use her. But Jinhsi is going to require a lot more resources than Jinhsiwuwa is, because thanks to her high damage output, she will beg for you to invest into her. You're not running the Moonlit Cloud set on her, instead you're running Void Thunder, which means you also have to chase crit stats and all of that other stuff. Because, well, she's simply a way larger part of the team's damage, so she is going to require you to farm all of that extra nonsense that Jinhsiwuwa would never ask of you. And don't even get me started on her weapon options. String Master is her undisputed best in slot, and the difference between it and the next best thing is staggeringly high. So this makes Jinhsi a very questionable investment if you don't have her, and didn't intend to get her. Her coordinated attacks will make Jinhsi stack her E up a lot more, and her element doesn't conflict with any healers, unlike Jinhsiwuwa who conflicts with Baizhi. So, as a summary, while she is the best in slot sub-DPS to use with Jinhsi, I wouldn't pull her just for Jinhsi specifically. You need to already want Jinhsi or have another character to use Jinhsi with to, like, actually be able to justify pulling her. But now let's take a gander at a bit of a crossover between Jinhsi and Jinhsiwuwa. A character that does not have coordinated attacks, but just unloads a lot of damage up front. That being Changli. So, just to say it, I do not recommend pulling Changli for your Jinhsi. At all. If you do want her though, she will work with Jinhsi. Changli does a lot of damage up front like Jinhsiwuwa, but it is a lot more than Jinhsiwuwa. She does a lot more damage, but then you also get back to the investment tax. Because she does more damage, you'll still want the investment, and she doesn't pay the tax through buffing. She really is just a damager, so you can't treat her like she's just a buff bot. Speaking of which, like, she just can't buff Jinhsi in her kit at all. Like, she's not running Moonlit Clouds, so she's just kind of a damage option. So, if you just want damage out of your sub DPS, Chang'Li's good, but outside of that, she's not really doing anything for you. So, with Chang'Li and Sanhua, I complained that they did not have coordinate attacks. But you want to know who does? Mortefi, baby! Mortefi and Sanhua are very similar when it comes to a Jinhsi team. Because just like Sanhua, he has a very fast conservator rotation. But he doesn't fit Jinhsi just as well as Sanhua does. Because Sanhua is just a universal character, whereas Mortefi has a very clear preference towards heavy attacks, which Jinhsi just doesn't do. Jinhsi doesn't do heavy attacks, so Mortefi is kind of losing a big part of his kit. He does use the Moonlit Cloud set, like Sanhua, and he gives 20% attack through his S6. And he's also better at stacking Jinhsi's E, but he has a lot less personal damage than Sanhua does, especially if you consider the fact that you're not really heavy attacking on Jinhsi. But he is a viable option, but you kinda already want to have sequences on him, since he's not on the Jinhsi banner. If you've been enjoying the video so far, be sure to follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's talk sustains. Starting with the best one in the entire game, Verena. Verena has a very short field time and has coordinated attacks, which means that in theory she is optimal with Jinhsi. Her problem, however, is that she is Spectro, and if you remember, Jinhsi's stack generation has a cooldown that is not based on the character, but rather on the element stacking it. So Verena being Spectro means that whenever Jinhsi is on the field, all of Jinhsi's basic attacks are not stacking, because Verena's coordinated attack is doing that instead. So this means that Verena is not just a perfect slotting. Having too short field time is also not the best, because Jinhsi's free outro skill does have a cooldown. So if you put in two characters that have very short field time, you might be running into problems there. Entering Baizhi. Baizhi is a very similar kit to Verena, because they both give 15% damage bonus on their outro, as well as both having an attack buff. Verena is just better because she's faster, but Jinhsi is fine with someone that's a little slower. Baizhi is Glacio, and while not having as many attacks, she can still generate more stacks because she doesn't conflict the same element as Jinhsi. Because she's free, it also makes her just a good investment that doesn't require you to pull or lose the 50-50 like Verena does. Or you just get Verena for free because this game's so generous and gives you free 5 stars at the wazoo. Anyway, because Baizhi and Verena also just share almost the same build and the same set and the same weapon, this means that they literally have the same investment. But Thunder, what about Tao Chi? Tao Chi's outro skill literally gives skill damage. Why yes it does! What about it? While Tao Chi can heal and shield, while also buffing skill damage, she has her flaws. In theory, Tao Chi should be perfect, so why isn't she? Hell, she can even give damage reduction, which is what the Bell Echo gives, and the Bell is broken. Her outro skill is simply not as universal as those of Verena and Baizhi, who you can use at the beginning of your rotation. Tao Chi is forced to be right before Jinhsi because of this, which loses you flexibility. Tao Chi also requires a lot more field time than other characters. While I said this is not a big issue with Baizhi, Tao Chi takes it to an extreme. Tao Chi doesn't even have the band-aid of a 20% attack buff on S6 like other supports. So while I do expect her to be a good character to be used with Jinhsi, I think you're likely just going to be better off using Baizhi or Verena. That being said, I think the best overall team will be Yinlin and Baizhi, with a more investment-friendly team being Sanhua and Verena. I can see Tao Chi also being useful, perhaps replacing Baizhi, but that would require us to find a way to make her field time more manageable, especially since she needs to refresh her skill damage buff after Jinhsi does the first skill, because outro buffs expire when you switch out. So what team are you planning to run with your Jinhsi? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. That'll be all from me. Peace.